Chapter 1. Introduction. The Belief Bubble. You know, I've always believed that loyalty is everything. It's the foundation of a good relationship, and I've been lucky enough to find that in Keely. From the moment we met, I knew she was different, someone I could trust completely. We've been through a lot together, and I've always felt secure in the belief that she'd never do anything to hurt me. I've seen what infidelity can do to people. Friends of mine have gone through it, and it's torn their lives apart. But I've never worried about that with Keely. I mean, sure, the thought has crossed my mind. What if? But I've always dismissed it. Keely isn't like that. She's loyal, just like me. I've always wanted a simple life, one where I could be happy with a loyal, loving partner by my side. We'd grow old together, watching the years go by, content in the knowledge that we'd always have each other. That's the dream, right? To find someone you can count on, no matter what. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't have my doubts now and then. I mean, who doesn't? There's always that little voice in the back of your head, wondering if everything's as perfect as it seems. But then I look at Keely, and I know I'm just being paranoid. She'd never cheat on me. She loves me, and I love her. We're in this together. I've had my share of struggles, never quite had the money or the status I wanted, and I've never been the most successful with women. But Keely made all of that seem unimportant. With her, I felt like I'd finally found what I'd been searching for. I guess that's why I've always been so grateful to have her in my life. She's been my rock, my partner, my everything. But there's this nagging feeling I can't shake lately. It's probably nothing, just my insecurities getting the better of me. Still, I can't help but wonder, what if things aren't as perfect as I've always believed? Chapter 2. The long-awaited vacation. Keely and I had been dreaming about this vacation for years. Life always seemed to get in the way. Work, responsibilities, you know how it goes. But finally, everything lined up, and we booked that trip to Monaco. It was supposed to be our time, a chance to reconnect and just enjoy each other's company without the stress of everyday life. We were both so excited, especially me. I couldn't wait to just relax by the sea, take in the sights, and create some unforgettable memories with Keely. I kept imagining us walking along the beach at sunset, laughing, holding hands, and feeling closer than ever. When we finally got there, it was everything I had hoped for. The weather was perfect, the hotel was luxurious, and it felt like a dream come true. For once, everything seemed to be going right. I felt a sense of peace, like this was exactly where we were meant to be. But then, out of nowhere, I started feeling sick. It hit me like a ton of bricks, fever, chills, the whole 9 yards. I tried to shake it off, but it just got worse. I ended up stuck in the hotel room feeling miserable, while Keely went out on her own. I hated the thought of her being alone on this trip we'd both been looking forward to, but there wasn't much I could do. I kept telling her to go and enjoy herself, not to worry about me. She seemed concerned at first, but eventually she started spending more and more time out of the room. I couldn't blame her. Who wants to sit around in a dark hotel room when you're in a place like Monaco? I figured she was just making the best of the situation, trying to salvage the vacation. But as the days went on, I started noticing little things. She'd come back later and later, and when I asked her what she'd been up to, her answers were vague, almost distracted. I told myself it was nothing, that she was just trying to give me some space to rest. But there was this tiny voice in the back of my head, whispering that something wasn't right. Still, I didn't want to ruin the vacation by making a big deal out of it, so I kept quiet, telling myself I was just being paranoid. After all, this was supposed to be our dream trip. I didn't want to spoil it with unfounded suspicions. Chapter 3. Illness and Isolation. Being stuck in that hotel room was torture. Here we were, in one of the most beautiful places in the world, and I was too sick to even step outside. All I could do was lie there, trying to get better, while Keely went out and explored Monaco on her own. I kept telling myself that this was just a setback, that once I recovered, we'd still have time to enjoy the trip together. But as the days dragged on, I started to feel more and more isolated. It wasn't just the illness, it was the distance I felt growing between Keely and me. She'd come back from her outings with stories of all the things she'd seen and done. But there was something off about the way she told them. She seemed distracted, almost like she was somewhere else. I tried to brush it off at first, thinking maybe she was just worried about me. But then I noticed how often she'd check her phone, or how she'd seem to lose track of time when she was out. It was like she wasn't fully present, even when she was sitting right next to me. One afternoon, she mentioned meeting some of the other guests at the hotel. She said they were friendly, and it was nice to have someone to talk to while I was stuck in the room. I wanted to be happy for her, glad that she wasn't feeling as lonely as I was. But something about the way she talked about them, especially one of the neighbors, made me uneasy. I didn't say anything, though. I didn't want to seem paranoid or possessive. After all, I was the one who encouraged her to go out and enjoy herself. But as I lay there, alone with my thoughts, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I started to wonder if maybe my illness had created more distance between us than I realized. There were moments when I'd hear her laughing softly on the phone, or she'd come back to the room looking unusually happy, like she'd just had the time of her life. I wanted to ask her what was going on, but I didn't want to come across as suspicious or insecure, so I kept it to myself, hoping that once I got better, everything would go back to normal. But deep down, I knew that things were starting to change, and not in a way I was comfortable with. Chapter 4. The Mysterious Neighbor. There was one night when Keely came back to the room, and something felt different. She had this glow about her, this energy I hadn't seen in a long time. I asked her what she'd been up to, and she told me she'd just been chatting with some of the other guests. But there was this name that kept coming up. The neighbor. I didn't think much of it at first. We were at a fancy hotel after all, and it wasn't unusual to strike up conversations with other travelers. But the more she talked about this neighbor, the more uneasy I became. There was something in her voice, a lightness, almost like she was excited. The first time she mentioned him, she said he was just someone she met by the pool. Harmless, right? But then it was like every time she went out, she'd come back with a new story about him. How he was so interesting, how he knew all the best spots in Monaco, how he'd shown her this hidden beach that wasn't crowded with tourists. It was always about him. I started to wonder why she was spending so much time with this guy, but I didn't want to seem jealous or controlling, so I kept quiet. One evening, I was feeling a bit better, so I decided to go out for a short walk. As I was heading back to the room, I saw them together, sitting in the hotel bar. They were deep in conversation, laughing, leaning in close. It felt like a punch to the gut. I stood there for a moment, frozen, not sure what to do. Part of me wanted to march over there, to ask what the hell was going on, but another part of me, the part that didn't want to believe what I was seeing, told me to just walk away, so I did. I turned around and went back to the room, pretending I hadn't seen anything. When Kaylee came back later, I asked her how her evening was, trying to keep my voice casual. She told me she'd had a nice time, met some interesting people, and then quickly changed the subject. It was like she didn't want to talk about it, and that only made me more suspicious. My mind started racing, thinking about all the times she'd come back late, all the vague answers she'd given me when I asked what she'd been up to. And then there were the moments I couldn't ignore, the times she'd leave the room to take a call, the way she'd laugh when she thought I couldn't hear her, the way she seemed to light up whenever she mentioned the neighbor. It was like she was hiding something, something big, and I could feel the trust between us starting to crack. One night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, my mind spinning with doubts and fears. What if this neighbor was more than just a friendly acquaintance? What if there was something going on between them, something she didn't want me to know about? The thought of it made my stomach churn. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but at the same time, I was terrified of what I might find out. The next morning, when Keely went out for her usual morning walk, I did something I'd never thought I'd do. I followed her. I needed to know what was really going on. I stayed a few steps behind, careful not to be seen, my heart pounding in my chest. She walked down to the pool, and there he was, waiting for her. I watched as they greeted each other with a smile, like they'd been looking forward to seeing each other. They sat down together, and as they talked, I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. I couldn't watch anymore. I turned around and headed back to the room, feeling sick to my stomach. Everything I'd feared, everything I'd tried to dismiss as paranoia, was right there in front of me. But still, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I needed to know more, to understand what was really happening before I made any decisions. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities. Was this just a harmless flirtation? Or was it something more? Was I losing Keely to this man, right under my nose? The thought of it consumed me, and I knew that sooner or later I'd have to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Chapter 5. Revelation of the Affair. The loop tightens. The tension had been building for days. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach every time Keely left the room, every time I saw her with that neighbor. It was like a dark cloud hanging over me, growing heavier and heavier until I could barely stand it anymore. I tried to push it aside, to tell myself I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Then, one afternoon, everything came crashing down. I was sitting alone in the room, trying to distract myself with a book, when there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before opening it. Standing there was the neighbor, the man who'd been filling my thoughts with doubt and suspicion. He looked serious, almost apologetic, and that immediately put me on edge. "Can we talk?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was something in his eyes that made my heart race. I didn't want to hear what he had to say, but I knew I had no choice. I stepped aside and let him in, my mind already spinning with fear and dread. He didn't beat around the bush. He told me straight out that something had happened between him and Keely. My first reaction was disbelief. I didn't want to accept it, couldn't accept it. I felt like the ground was slipping out from under me, like the world I knew was crumbling apart. "I'm sorry, Jack," he said, his voice full of regret. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." I wanted to scream at him, to throw him out of the room, to demand that he take it all back. But I just stood there, frozen, as the words sunk in. My worst fears, the ones I'd tried so hard to ignore, were true. Keely had betrayed me. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted more than anyone, had gone behind my back with this man. How could this happen? I finally managed to ask, my voice shaking. "Why? What did I do wrong?" He shook his head. "It's not your fault, Jack. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. But you deserve to know the truth." Hearing those words, made something inside me snap. I felt a wave of anger, hotter and more intense than anything I'd ever felt before. How dare he come here and say this to me? How dare he pretend to care about how I felt after what he'd done? But beneath the anger, there was an even deeper pain. Pain from knowing that the life I thought I had, the love I believed in, was a lie. I don't know how long we stood there, him trying to explain and me trying to keep it together. I felt like I was watching it all from outside my body, like this couldn't really be happening. But it was. Every word he said was like a knife in my heart, and I just wanted it to stop. Finally, he left, and I was alone. Alone with the crushing realization that my marriage was falling apart. I felt numb, like the world had lost all its color and warmth. The loop that had been quietly opening from the moment we arrived in Monaco had tightened around me, pulling me into a reality I wasn't prepared to face. For a long time, I just sat there, trying to process everything. I kept thinking about all the little signs I'd ignored, the things I'd brushed off as nothing. How could I have been so blind? How could I not have seen this coming? I knew I had to confront Keely, but the thought of it terrified me. I didn't know if I could handle hearing the truth from her, hearing her admit that she'd betrayed me, but I couldn't avoid it forever. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. I needed to hear it from her, no matter how much it hurt. But before I did, I needed a moment to breathe, to gather my thoughts, to try and figure out how to face the woman I thought I knew, the woman I still loved, despite everything. Chapter 6. Struggle with Acceptance. After the neighbor left, I just sat there in silence, trying to wrap my mind around what he had told me. It felt like my entire world had shifted, like everything I thought I knew was suddenly uncertain. I kept going over his words in my head, trying to make sense of them, but nothing made sense. How could Keely do this? How could she betray me like that? I wanted to believe it was all some horrible misunderstanding, that maybe the neighbor was lying, or that I had somehow misunderstood him. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There were too many signs, too many things that I had brushed off as nothing. I had been fooling myself, and now the truth was staring me in the face. I spent hours in that room, going back and forth in my mind, trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront Keely right then and there, to demand answers, to make her explain how she could do this to us. But another part of me, maybe the stronger part, was terrified. I was terrified of what she might say, of what it would mean for us if she confirmed what I already knew. I started questioning everything: our marriage, our love, my own judgment. Had I been blind this whole time? Had I missed the signs? I thought about all the times I had trusted her, believed in her, loved her. Was it all a lie? Had she been playing me for a fool? Or was it something that just happened? I thought about the life we had built together, the dreams we shared. I thought about how much I loved her, how much I had trusted her with everything I had. And now, all of that was hanging by a thread. How do you accept that the person you love most in the world has betrayed you? How do you come to terms with the fact that your entire life might be built on a lie? I kept hoping that there would be some explanation, some reason that would make it all okay, that would make it easier to accept, but there wasn't. The truth was brutal and simple. Keely had been unfaithful, and nothing could change that. As the hours passed, I realized I was delaying the inevitable. I could sit there all day, torturing myself with questions and doubts, but it wouldn't change anything. The truth was out, and I had to face it. I had to confront Keely and hear it from her own lips, no matter how much it hurt. But how? How do you even begin that conversation? How do you look someone in the eye and ask them why they tore your heart out? I felt like a coward for not confronting her sooner, for sitting in that room trying to avoid the pain. But I couldn't help it. I wasn't ready to hear her admit it, to see the guilt in her eyes. I wasn't ready to lose everything I thought we had. So, I waited. I waited for Keely to come back to the room, my mind racing with all the things I wanted to say, all the questions I needed to ask. And when she finally walked through that door, I felt my heart drop into my stomach. This was it. There was no turning back now. I was about to find out the truth, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what I was going to hear. Chapter 7. Confrontation. A roller coaster of emotions. When Keely walked back into the room, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into an abyss. She looked at me and smiled, the same smile I had seen so many times before, the one that used to make me feel like everything was right in the world. But now, all I could see was betrayal behind it. I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I had to confront her, no matter how much it tore me apart. "Keely, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked at me, her smile fading as she sensed the seriousness in my tone. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her eyes searching mine, trying to understand what was going on. "What's wrong, Jack?" she asked, her voice soft, almost too soft. It made me want to believe that everything was fine, that this was just a bad dream. But I couldn't let myself be swayed by that softness. Not now. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know about you and the neighbor." For a moment, there was silence. Keely just stared at me, her face a mask of shock, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then slowly, she looked down, her hands trembling in her lap. That silence was the longest, most painful moment of my life. I could feel my world crumbling around me, piece by piece. "Jack, I'm so sorry," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her words hit me like a freight train, confirming everything I had feared. I felt my legs go weak, and I had to sit down before I collapsed. My worst nightmare was coming true, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. "Why, Keely?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why would you do this to us? To me?" She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, Jack. I love you, but I got lost. I don't know what happened. It just happened." Her words only made it worse. How could something like this just happen? How could she betray everything we had built together, everything I thought we stood for? The anger bubbled up inside me, mixing with the hurt, the confusion, and the overwhelming sense of loss. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Loneliness? That's what drove her to this? I had been right there, in the same hotel, just a few floors away, and instead of coming to me, instead of talking to me, she went to him. The betrayal cut even deeper, knowing that she chose to confide in a stranger rather than the man she had promised to love and be loyal to. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, the reality of the situation sinking in for both of us. The roller coaster of emotions had left me drained, empty, and uncertain about what the future held. All I knew was that the life I had known was over, and I had no idea where to go from here. Chapter 8. Emotional Turmoil and Self-Reflection. After the confrontation, I felt completely drained. I could barely process what had just happened, let alone figure out what I was supposed to do next. I left the room, needing to get away, to clear my head, to be anywhere but in that space where everything had fallen apart. I walked down to the beach, hoping the sound of the waves would drown out the storm inside me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape it. My mind kept replaying Keely's words, her apologies, her excuses. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, one where everything I thought I knew was turned upside down. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over again. How could she do this? Why didn't I see it coming? Was this my fault? Did I somehow push her away? The pain was unbearable. It was like a weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I felt hollow, like something vital had been ripped out of me, leaving only emptiness behind. The woman I loved, the woman I had trusted with everything, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And now I was left to pick up the pieces, to try to make sense of a world that no longer made any sense at all. I started to doubt myself in ways I never had before. Was I not good enough? Was there something wrong with me that made her seek comfort in someone else's arms? The questions gnawed at me, eroding what little self-esteem I had left. I had always prided myself on being a good husband, on being loyal, supportive, loving. But now, all of that seemed meaningless. If I was such a good husband, how did this happen? As I stood there on the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore, I realized that I was at a crossroads. I could either let this destroy me, let the pain and betrayal consume me, or I could try to find a way through it. But I had no idea how to move forward. The future I had imagined, the life I thought I was building with Keely, had been shattered, and I was left wondering if there was any way to piece it back together, or if I even wanted to. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to try to work through it, to find some way to salvage what we had. But another part of me, a part that was growing stronger by the minute, knew that I might never be able to look at her the same way again. The trust was gone, replaced by a deep, aching wound that I wasn't sure would ever heal. I spent hours on that beach, lost in my thoughts, my emotions swinging wildly between anger, sadness, confusion, and despair. By the time I finally made my way back to the hotel, I felt like a different person. The man who had walked down to the beach was gone, replaced by someone who had seen the dark side of love and wasn't sure if he could ever fully recover. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. I had to make a decision, to figure out what my next step was going to be. Because as much as it hurt, life was still moving forward, and I had to find a way to move with it, even if I wasn't sure where it would take me. Chapter 9. Seeking support. Opening up. After what felt like days of being trapped inside my own head, I knew I couldn't keep it all bottled up anymore. The weight of it was too much to carry alone. I needed to talk to someone, to hear another voice, to get some perspective on the nightmare I was living. So I did something I don't usually do. I reached out. The first person I called was my old friend, Mark. We've known each other since college, and he's one of the few people I trust with anything. When he picked up, I could barely get the words out. My voice was shaky, and I wasn't even sure where to start. But Mark, being the friend he is, didn't need much to understand that something was seriously wrong. "Jack, what's going on?" he asked, concern heavy in his voice. I hesitated, feeling the lump in my throat tighten. How do you even begin to tell someone that your wife cheated on you? "Mark, Keely, she cheated on me," I finally said, the words coming out in a rush, almost as if saying them quickly would make them hurt less. But it didn't. It still felt like a punch to the gut, just like the first time I heard it. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Mark's voice came back, steady and calm. "Jack, I'm so sorry, man. I don't even know what to say. That's terrible." Hearing the sympathy in his voice almost broke me. For so long, I'd been trying to keep it together, to be strong. But now that I was finally opening up, the floodgates were starting to crack. I told Mark everything about the neighbor, the confrontation, the betrayal. I poured out all the confusion, the anger, the pain, and Mark listened. He didn't judge, he didn't offer empty platitudes. He just listened, and in that moment, that was exactly what I needed. "I can't believe this is happening," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking, what did I do wrong? How did I not see this coming?" "Jack, this isn't your fault," Mark replied firmly. "You did everything right. Sometimes people make terrible decisions, and it has nothing to do with you. It's on her, not you." I wanted to believe him, but it was hard. The doubts were still there, gnawing at the edges of my mind. But hearing someone else say it, hearing Mark remind me that I wasn't to blame, it gave me a small bit of relief, a tiny spark of clarity in the midst of the chaos. We talked for a while longer about what I should do next, about how I needed to take care of myself. Mark offered to come out and stay with me for a few days, just so I wouldn't have to go through this alone. I was grateful for the offer, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for that yet. I needed time to think, to process everything. Those words meant more to me than he could ever know. For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt a small glimmer of hope. I wasn't alone. I had people who cared about me, who would stand by me no matter what, and that made the road ahead seem just a little less daunting. Chapter 10. Decision time. Stay or leave. After talking to Mark, I spent the next few days in a state of constant turmoil. The weight of the decision I had to make pressed down on me like a ton of bricks. I kept going back and forth, trying to figure out what to do. Should I stay and try to work things out with Keely, or should I walk away and start over? The thought of leaving everything behind was terrifying, but so was the idea of staying and trying to rebuild something that felt so broken. Every time I looked at Keely, I felt a mix of emotions that I could barely control. I still loved her. God, did I love her? But every time I thought about what she had done, it was like a knife twisting in my heart. Could I really forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? Or would this betrayal always be there, lurking in the background, poisoning everything we tried to rebuild? I thought about the life we had shared, the good times, the memories, the plans we had made. Part of me didn't want to throw all of that away, but another part of me, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, kept reminding me that things would never be the same. The trust we had, the foundation of our relationship, was gone. And without that, what did we really have left? One night, after Keely had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen, trying to make sense of it all. I thought about what Mark had said, about how this wasn't my fault, about how, if I stayed, I'd have to live with the constant reminder of her betrayal. If I left, I'd have to start over, alone, with nothing but the clothes on my back and the pain in my heart. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept tossing and turning, my mind racing with thoughts of what my life would look like either way. I knew that no matter what I chose, it would be incredibly difficult. There was no easy answer, no quick fix, but I also knew that I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. I had to make a choice, and I had to make it soon. Finally, as the first light of dawn started to creep through the curtains, I made my decision. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without a lot of tears and soul-searching. But deep down, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't stay. As much as I wanted to, as much as I loved Keely, I couldn't ignore what she had done. The trust was gone, and without that, our relationship was a shadow of what it used to be. I knew that if I stayed, we would be trapped in a cycle of blame, regret, and resentment. And that wasn't the life I wanted for either of us. When Keely woke up that morning, I sat her down and told her my decision. It was the hardest conversation I've ever had. She cried, she begged me to stay, to give us another chance. But I knew in my heart that it was over. I had to leave for my own sake and for hers. Staying together would only prolong the pain for both of us. It wasn't the ending I had ever imagined for us, but it was the one we needed. As I packed my bags and walked out the door, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I was walking away from the life I had known, but I was also stepping into a new one where I could start to heal and maybe, just maybe, find happiness again. Chapter 11. Finding Strength. The healing process. Walking away from Keely was the hardest thing I've ever done. The first few days were a blur of emotions: anger, sadness, regret. I felt like I was drifting through life, not really sure where I was headed or what I was supposed to do next. But deep down, I knew that leaving was the right choice, even if it didn't feel that way right away. I moved into a small apartment not far from where we used to live. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it was a place where I could start to rebuild. The nights were the worst, though. The silence was deafening, and the loneliness was almost unbearable. I'd lie awake, thinking about everything that had happened, wondering if I'd made the right decision. But every time those doubts crept in, I reminded myself that staying would have been worse. The pain of betrayal would have eaten me alive. Slowly, I began to find my footing again. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But little by little, I started to reclaim my life. I focused on taking care of myself, both physically and mentally. I started going for long walks, just to clear my head, to remind myself that there was still a world out there beyond the pain. I began to pick up old hobbies I'd let slip away over the years, things that brought me joy before life got so complicated. I also started seeing a therapist. At first, I was hesitant, unsure if talking to someone could really help. But I quickly realized how much I needed it. It was a place where I could unpack everything I was feeling, where I could sort through the mess that had become my life. Therapy helped me to understand that the pain I was feeling was normal, that healing was a process, and that it was okay to take it one day at a time. One of the hardest parts of the healing process was learning to forgive, not just Keely, but myself. I had to let go of the anger, the bitterness, the sense of failure that had been weighing me down. I had to accept that what happened wasn't a reflection of my worth, that I wasn't to blame for her choices. And that took time. But with each passing day, the weight began to lift, just a little. I found strength in places I didn't expect, in the support of friends who checked in on me, even when I didn't feel like talking, in the quiet moments of reflection, when I could finally breathe without the pain suffocating me, in the realization that I had survived something I never thought I could, and that I was still standing. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened. How could I? But it was about learning to live with it, to let it be part of my story, without letting it define me. The scars were still there, and they always would be, but they were starting to fade, and in their place, I was beginning to see something else: resilience, the ability to move forward, to find hope in the darkest of times, and to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something better waiting for me on the other side. Chapter 12. New Beginnings, Meeting Someone New. As the weeks turned into months, I started to find a new rhythm in my life. The pain of what happened with Keely was still there, but it had dulled into something more manageable, something I could live with. I was finally starting to feel like myself again, or maybe even a better version of myself, someone who had been through hell and come out the other side, stronger and more aware of what I truly needed and deserved. I wasn't looking for love. In fact, the idea of getting involved with someone new was the last thing on my mind. I was focused on healing, on figuring out who I was outside of that relationship. But as life often does, it had other plans. I met Jessica at a local coffee shop. It was one of those chance encounters that you don't see coming, the kind that makes you believe that maybe everything happens for a reason. I was just there to grab a quick cup of coffee and get some work done. I wasn't expecting anything special, just another ordinary day. But then I noticed her. She was sitting alone, at a table near the window, absorbed in a book, with a soft smile on her face. There was something about her that caught my eye, something warm and inviting. I don't know what came over me, but I found myself striking up a conversation with her. It was easy, natural, nothing forced or awkward. We talked about the book she was reading, about the best places in town to get a good cup of coffee, and before I knew it, we were laughing like old friends. There was a connection there, something genuine and real. It wasn't the kind of intense, overwhelming attraction I had felt in the past. It was something quieter, something that felt right. We exchanged numbers, and over the next few weeks, we started meeting up more often. First for coffee, then for dinner, and eventually for long walks around the city where we talked about everything and nothing. Jessica was different from anyone I'd ever met. She was kind, patient, and understanding, qualities that I hadn't realized I needed so much until I found them in her. She knew about my past, about what had happened with Keely, and she never judged me for it. Instead, she listened, offering support without trying to fix me or rush me into anything. She gave me the space to be myself, to heal at my own pace. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. Being with Jessica didn't feel like an escape or a distraction. It felt like coming home. She didn't fill the void left by Keely. Instead, she helped me realize that I didn't need anyone to complete me, but that having someone like her by my side made the journey that much sweeter. It wasn't long before I realized that I was falling for her, slowly and steadily, in a way that felt safe and real. It wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending it hadn't happened. It was about moving forward, about building something new on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Jessica brought light back into my life, but more importantly, she helped me see that the light had been there all along. I just needed to let it in. With her, I found a new kind of happiness, one that was rooted in the present, not overshadowed by the past. And as our relationship grew, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't about avoiding the pain, but about finding someone who was worth taking the risk for. Chapter 13. Final Resolution. Closing the Loop. Looking back on everything that's happened, it's hard to believe how much has changed in such a short amount of time. There were days when I thought I'd never be able to move on from the pain, from the betrayal that had turned my world upside down. But life has a way of surprising you, of pushing you forward even when you're not sure you're ready. Meeting Jessica wasn't something I expected, but it's something I'm incredibly grateful for. She didn't just help me heal. She showed me that there's life after heartbreak, that it's possible to find joy and love again, even when you think those things are out of reach. With her, I've found a new sense of peace, a new kind of happiness that's rooted in the present, not in the shadows of the past. But more than anything, I've learned something important about myself. I've learned that I'm stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. I've learned that healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about accepting it, learning from it, and using it to build a better future. The scars are still there, and they always will be, but they no longer define me. They're just a part of my story, a story that's still unfolding. When I think about Keely now, there's no more anger, no more bitterness. I've forgiven her, not because what she did was okay, but because I needed to let go of the past in order to move forward. I don't know what her life is like now, and that's okay. I hope she finds her own peace, just as I've found mine. As for the beliefs I once held so tightly, the belief that loyalty was everything, that good women existed, and that bad ones should be punished, I've come to see things a bit differently. Loyalty is still important, of course, but I've learned that people are complicated, that good and bad aren't always so easily defined. Life isn't black and white, and sometimes people make mistakes. What matters is how we choose to respond to those mistakes, how we grow and move forward. In the end, I've found that true happiness isn't about finding someone who's perfect. It's about finding someone who's willing to work through the imperfections, who's willing to build a life with you, one day at a time. With Jessica, I've found that kind of partnership, and it's something I cherish deeply. As I close this chapter of my life, I'm filled with a sense of gratitude for the lessons I've learned, for the strength I've discovered, and for the love I've found along the way. The road hasn't been easy, but it's led me to a place where I can finally say that I'm at peace, that I'm happy, and that I'm ready for whatever comes next. The loop that started with so much pain and uncertainty has finally closed, and in its place, there's a new beginning, a beginning that I'm excited to embrace, with hope, with love, and with a heart that's open to all the possibilities the future holds.